I'd just like to begin. Would you like to introduce yourself and where you come from? And
Okay, I think we knew each other on LinkedIn a lot, but I'm Ashita, I'm from Malaysia. And I have been, my son, I have two sons, and unique about me is I have two in a different spectrum. One is highly gifted, and another one is severely dyslexic and dyscalculic, with some visual issues when he was young. So we are in Oregon, so we travel quite a bit. So I grew up in the States, so I kind of knew what's the education system like in a Western country. So when I came back and I realized that it is not a good fit for my kids, it's very, very behind. Right. And what I mean behind is that during those times, but my son now is 17. So, but back in those times, if in our kind of culture, if you don't seem to follow the teacher, you get beaten up, you know?
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So my son was in kindergarten and they would hold his hair and whack it on the wall for being stupid. And I'm lucky to have caught that. But you know, and it has some detrimental effects on his mental health.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And on his learning at the time, and on how he felt at the time, and it'll go into his adulthood if it's not caught early and dealt with.
Right. And during that time, people here do not understand dyslexia. When I try to get a diagnosis, the pediatrician would ask me, "What is dyslexia?" Then I realized there's no chance. So we had to bring him abroad to get him diagnosed.
Yeah. And where did you take him to get him diagnosed?
US.
You took him to the US. And is that diagnosis accepted in Malaysia?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So because they won't diagnose, it's difficult to get a diagnostic assessment in Malaysia, but they do accept it when someone has a diagnosis. And what do they do with that? I mean, do they give accommodations or?
No, I'm being advised by a lot of by my therapist, the psychologist who assessed my son. He's like, "Don't go to school, homeschool." Have you heard of homeschooling?
Yeah.
And so I decided that I'm going to pull both my kids, because I realized with the culture we have, especially in Asia, we value gifted, but we do not like the disabled. So I was told by the principal, you can take your younger son out, but I want your older son because he's got value.
Wow. And how did your younger son feel about that?
I didn't tell him until it's a lot later, but I realized like they are not ready to be inclusive to various types of abilities.
Well, you said before we began the recording, you gave a statistic or a figure of the employment rate of disabled people in the civil service in Malaysia. What was that again?
They managed to get only 0.3%.
Wow. And
this is, I think, about a year ago or 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And so it's really, really poor. And we don't have any statistics. I collect statistics. I collect data right now. So I couldn't find statistics about how many disabled people are in the private sector, but it'll give a good indication. If you have 0.3% of disabled in the public service, you probably have a lot less in the private sector.
So I'm guessing there's a kind of, maybe, I won't say stigma, but maybe a negative attitude towards, let's say, disability, but it could be difference, neurodivergence. Is there a negative attitude in society towards this? Or are people's attitudes positive? It's just that there are structures that make it harder for neurodivergent or disabled people to get jobs?
Both,
right.
Both. We are not as inclusive. I mean, there is more awareness about people with disability now than maybe 15 years ago, but there's still no willingness to roll your sleeve and get your boots dirty and get it done, you know.
As we said earlier, everybody's inclusive until it gets difficult.
This is the part where I feel the country is struggling because it's getting difficult.
Yeah.
And I don't know what to do with it, and it's really making me uncomfortable. So, you know, and being that I homeschool my sons, both my sons, I realized after I finished homeschooling them, I need to still step up. I still need to be an advocate, be that voice where these vulnerable people do not have one. You know, if it's not for mothers with special needs, I don't think a lot of people will want to hear, you know. So sometimes sharing our stories, sharing experiences and our struggles, it relates, it tugs at your heartstrings, and, you know, people are willing at least to have that discussion.
And so, is there a dyslexia association in Malaysia? I mean, I know the Dyslexia Association of Singapore is excellent, but I don't know if there's a dyslexia association in Malaysia.
There is a dyslexia association, but it's not really as advanced as what's needed. You know, there's a lot of changes, and there's also a lot of unwillingness to expand and learn what's out there. And also, of course, to be fair to them, it's the funds. You know, Singapore's a rich country. We are not. So to go there, I mean, for me, I would spend about every year for therapy and academic intervention. Even though I homeschool my kids, I would spend about 60 to 70,000 ringgit a year.
Wow.
Yes.
And
that
can you put that in terms of US dollars, for instance? Do you know what that translates as?
A handy calculator.
Sorry for putting you on the spot here. I could look at myself, but I'm lazy.
Well, that's about almost 15,000 US dollars a year.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So does that mean then that let's say dyslexia or something, is that therefore, is there a social inequality that those who can afford to get help for their kids, to get the proper schooling for their kids, they can get that, but the poorer people can't? Is that the way that this works?
In a way, yes. Even I would call it the top 20%, the T20.
Right.
They could do online therapy. They could do online schooling with, you know, various dyslexic organizations around the world, which is what I did.
Yeah.
I would take from America. We could afford to send for international schools. We could afford to send for, you know, top-notch tutoring for academic intervention. But there's a vast availability of resources, even for the M40. Yeah, even for the middle class. And it's something we want to advocate and tell people, you know, or policymakers that we need to do something about it. I mean, they don't see the economic impact of having dyslexics neglected, but there is a study done a couple of years ago by a professor that nearly slightly more than 50% in the juvenile system in a couple of prisons in Malaysia are highly dyslexic.
Oh yeah. I can well believe that. I can well believe that. Dr. Neil Alexander Pass's book is an excellent book there. Could you show it again, because it is really an interesting one. Neurodiversity.
And you can see all
the crime. all the tabs you've got open. It's like the dyslexic brain, isn't it?
And for last year, I think there were about a third, or I can't recall the statistic, but about 300,000 students were not able or failed their SPM, which is actually their O levels. So that kind of relates to the, you know, especially with COVID and everything, schooling was disrupted, and they just never even bothered to get their SPM SPM results. They didn't show up. And it's really disturbing to see, like, if you have this group of people, and you don't pay attention to where they're going, you know, in 5 years' time, where do you think they'll be? They can't read, they can't write, they don't have certification. You know, where will
what might happen to these kids? I mean, I'm guessing, is the education system itself quite a traditional education system in Malaysia? So it's going to be harder for dyslexic kids anyway. And if you don't get your O levels, the SPMs, did you say? If you don't get your your O levels, your SPNs, what then happens to you? What are your economic chances?
It gets narrower, much narrower. You can take vocational route, but it doesn't really solve the main cause, which is you can't read, you can't write. How are you going to pursue your diploma, for example?
Yeah.
How are you going to do some certification that requires some paperwork? So, you know, there's still going to be some failure rate. And I see a lot of adult students, young adult students who come to me, it's like, oh, I changed multiple colleges because I keep failing in this, I keep failing in that, I keep failing in this. And the amount of mental health, the amount of mental torture that you get when you start failing, you know, so it worries me. It really worries me to talk to them, and they feel so dejected and they don't know what options. And I always tell the students, ignore your ranking, focus on your skills, focus on your strength, and try and be an entrepreneur and study online bit by bit.
And I suppose this is a question I'd like to ask, a personal question, and I hope it's okay for me to ask this, but you've got a dyslexic son. How do you think you can help him progress through the system and progress past the system into a successful life, whatever success means for this son?
First of all,
socially
I
successful.
bypassed the system.
Escape the system.
I bypassed the system by homeschooling. I used an American curriculum. I don't use local because I know he cannot survive with a very traditional rote learning methodology. So even then, we go through the vocational route. And my aim early on was making sure he knows his skills. You know, he knows what his strengths are, and we cater to that strength from elementary level. So I don't get him to learn just to pass an exam. I get him to learn because he's passionate about it. He picks the subjects that he's good at. And I also make sure that his reading and writing level is up to year 8 or 9. I do not neglect his reading or writing. And he's doing, you know, with his severe, he's not just dyslexic, but he has severe dyscalculia, but he's doing automotive engineering now. So. And even then, we are not going to put him in local vocational for long. Once he gets his vocational O levels called SKM, we will be sending him abroad, where we find that vocational support for special needs students are much better, more organized. The structure is very stable and strong. So, you know, we kind of bypass it, but we are lucky because we can afford it. Like I said, it takes a lot of money. It takes about, you know, 60,000, 70,000 ringgit a year for me to guide him from there to where he is now. And you know, it's even painful for me, what not person from a middle income class or the rural. And the sad thing is, in the rural area, they have, of course, more people who are disabled would be segregated, would be focused on the rural because they can't afford to stay in the city. I did a study with a mentor of mine when we were doing. I wrote a book, so when we did a book,
you hold that up again.
But it's in Malay.
That's fine. I'm sure there'll be people who'll be interested in this. Beautiful.
Yeah, and we realized like some schools, half of it couldn't even hold a pencil. So you know, and the fact that there's no screening done and all that stuff, we don't know where they'll end up. So there's still a lot more work. Like to summarize, there's still a lot more work to create awareness, to advocate, and to train. And I do find that nowadays there are a lot more teachers who with their own initiative want to learn, even though they're not being trained in dyslexia. They want to know more. So that's a good thing. The disabled community in Malaysia, the registration is pretty low. I would study in Europe or US there would be a healthy 20 to 30%, right?
When you say the registration's really low, what do you mean by that?
Only 2% of the population registered themselves
Registered as disabled or registered
as disabled.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Oh.
You know, I'm not sure why, but I would suspect it's a stigma. You know, it's still a taboo.
Yeah.
It's still there's no proper screening process done.
Yeah.
You know, like autism or Down syndrome, you can see it from young. But for dyslexia, unless you are in the school system, then you can see. So there's not really a rush for people to.
Yeah. And I guess maybe in the rural areas, the school system isn't quite as maybe as rigorous or some cities. And so it's going to be harder to see dyslexia because, you know, you don't have the same strict sort of maths and English sort of criteria. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's and also there's still lack of awareness of what dyslexia is among many people, you know, especially, you know, for everyone, parents, community teachers, because they look like you and me. So it's really hard for people to accept, like, are you disabled? You don't look disabled.
Yeah. And is there other laws in Malaysia to help dyslexic people on neurodivergent? There aren't. Oh, right.
I don't see any. Yeah, neurodivergent, I don't see any.
Yeah, there are disabled laws, disability laws, but no laws that incorporate dyslexia into these legislations, for instance.
Right, and we also face a lot of issues when it comes to just general support. For example, if you're a person with disability, you're not allowed to get insurance, healthcare insurance.
Oh, right. So this would also explain why there's such a low registration of disabled people, such a low count of how many officially disabled people there are.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so that seems, I don't want to comment, but it sounds a bit discriminatory.
Oh, you can say we're used to it. As a mom with special needs, I totally know. But you know, it's not like I'm trying to name and shame any organization.
Of course,
It's more of like creating awareness that, you know, you can't pass like, oh, person with disability, pass it to this ministry or pass it to this body. Everyone needs to play their part, you know. For example, driving. Do you know how many dyslexics cannot drive? I taught my son. I taught my son since he's 14 how to drive. You know, and he's 17 now. And you know, it takes a while. It takes a long time.
Oh, yeah.
And I still, even after 2 years, I still don't trust him on the road alone.
Well, I mean, yeah, there's obvious things such as left and right, such as the speed counter. If he's dyscalculic, the speed counter. Reading road signs, things like reading road signs is not an obvious thing to do. There's a lot of executive function that goes into driving a car.
Right, you need to organize your thoughts.
Yeah. No, it's absolute. This is, you know, part of the reason that I can't drive. You know, so yeah, absolutely. So a lot of dyslexics can't drive, which means that economically they're at a disadvantage, because economically you're advantaged if you can drive and disadvantaged if you can't. So this widens the gap even further.
It widens the gap even further, and you know, maybe you need to, you know, like the Ministry of Transport needs to look at it, and you can't just pass, oh, this is for the welfare ministry. I think everyone needs to know. Yeah.